Hey, Stansell team. I'm Jim Flynn, filling in for Angelica Connor. I am, of course, blessed to be our safety manager, but this week we're going to be talking about something a little different and very important, ADA. And we're also going to get a much different and important perspective on ADA. And to help us do that is Raquel Pancho joining us. She's the ADA coordinator for the city of Tampa. And we're so blessed to have her. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Oh, it's our pleasure. You're on the hot seat. Are you ready to dive right into it?
Sure, happy to.
Awesome. Can you just start off, Raquel, by just telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got involved in ADA?
Oh, absolutely. So I actually graduated from the University of South Florida with a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in rehabilitation counseling. The majority of my career actually was in direct services to persons with disabilities. At some point, I was able to kind of jump in and dive into more of the rights aspect for persons with disabilities, investigating access concerns, IEP concerns in the public school systems, and that sort of led my way into the Americans with Disabilities Act. I used to work for an agency called the Advocacy Center for Persons with Disabilities, where I investigated ADA and IEP concerns within our school systems, ADA in the community. Held a position at the University of South Florida, where I was the ADA coordinator for 3 of the 7 years that I was there, and then moved over to the city of Tampa, where I started in 2017. So I have the fortunate opportunity to have been able to receive firsthand knowledge from our community members through a number of years. I've been working since the early 1990s with persons with disabilities, and hearing about the challenges that they're experiencing in the community. And I think it's a great combination with the work that I do now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, and we knew we had the right person here, but after hearing about that background, I think definitely very blessed to have you here. I don't want, and by the way, go Bulls.
Oh, yeah.
Don't want to assume that we're very heavily involved and kind of intimately familiar with ADA here, but let's not make certain assumptions. Mm-hmm. If you don't mind, take us through a brief background of what ADA is, how it was formed, when it was formed, or anything like that you can share.
Sure, absolutely. So the Americans with Disabilities Act actually was passed in the early 1990s. President George Bush was the president actually who signed off on it. So the Americans with Disabilities Act basically is a civil rights law. It has several different sections to it. Title I covers employment. Title II covers state and local government. Title III covers locations that affect commerce. So we're talking about the public places, the scope within your work. And there's also a section that covers telecommunications as well. But the focus really is to ensure that persons with disabilities have equitable access to the services that are providing within those entities. So under employment, anything that's available for community members in the employment arena, application, hiring on the job site, even activities. State and local government, again, all of the services that we provide, locations under Title III, which is restaurants, hotels, movie theaters, access within those locations as well.
Okay.
So that people can enjoy what everybody else has the opportunity to be able to enjoy.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
In the United States, roughly how many people are covered under ADA?
Yes, so thank you for providing the statistics. I have
Sure.
seen some of that information. I think it was like 40,
almost 43 million,
yeah,
I think, is what
million.
I read, right?
Yes, so it's a large number. And what I also like to do, because a lot of times when people hear the word disability, they don't necessarily realize what that encompasses.
Mm-hmm.
So under the Americans with Disabilities Act, it's actually a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity or functions. So let me kind of refer to my list. So caring for yourself, walking, learning, performing manual tasks, standing, reading, seeing, lifting, concentrating, hearing, bending, thinking, eating, speaking, communicating, sleeping, breathing, and working.
Wow.
So when I do my trainings, I always like to throw out some diagnosis, because again, some people don't realize that they can have some protections under the ADA. So when a person's diagnosed with sleep apnea, they can actually qualify for protections because their sleeping is substantially impaired. Individuals who now have a back injury and have substantial limitations with bending and lifting can also qualify for protections. A person with attention deficit disorder can qualify because their concentrating is substantially limited. Individuals who now have arthritis and have difficulty, buttoning their shirts, opening jars, can qualify because those are substantial limitations. And then also, if your bodily functions are substantially limited, you can also qualify for protection. So let me kind of throw out the categories.
Yeah.
So if your immune system, normal cell growth, digestive, bowel, bladder, neurological, brain, respiratory, circulatory, endocrine, and reproductive systems are substantially impacted, you can qualify. So again, let me throw out some diagnoses.
Sure.
People who have diabetes can qualify because their endocrine system is no longer functioning. Individuals who have fibromyalgia, lupus can qualify because their immune system is substantially impaired. Individuals with sickle cell can qualify because their blood cell growth is substantially impacted. Individuals with Crohn's disease, IBS, can qualify because their digestive and bowel systems are substantially impacted. A person with heart disease can qualify because their circulatory system is impacted. Somebody with epilepsy, a traumatic brain injury, can qualify because their neurological systems have been substantially impacted. Wow. So I love to kind of break it down to the some diagnosis, again, because a lot of times people just think of the three categories: a person who uses a wheelchair, a person who's blind, or somebody who's deaf and hard of hearing.
Right.
But it's much more than that, and that's why, the 40 million in the statistics really encompasses many people.
So Raquel, it's easy to see easily how we can get to that 43 million that is estimated with ADA people that qualify.
Absolutely.
Might even be a little more based on all the people that you describe those conditions.
I completely agree, because, especially when people are doing the census, they may not realize that they are a person who qualifies under those categories.
Yes. I think, and I don't want to make assumptions, but I can just speak from interacting with our people here, and even myself for that matter. So we're so focused on ground up and remodels for these established, like McDonald's and Raising Cane's, Outback Steakhouse, First Watch. And when we hear ADA, I think our mind automatically runs to people that are unfortunately in wheelchairs or wheelchair bound. But based on what you had just described, and maybe you can elaborate a little more, it sounds like there's an awful lot more people and a lot more conditions that we should be thinking about outside of people in wheelchairs.
Exactly. So, well, first of all, it's fantastic that you even have the forethought to be considering access for persons with disabilities. And, when we are thinking about access, one of the number one barriers are faced by individuals who have mobility limitations. So, the fact that you're considering that is just a wonderful thing, from the get-go. So when we're talking about individuals who have mobility limitations, we have to consider individuals who are using walkers, canes and crutches, as well, because the access concerns might be a little bit different for individuals. So as an example, the opening force of a door can substantially hinder a person who's trying to maneuver that type of mobility equipment as they're going through a door. So if that door is really heavy, that's going to be a great struggle for the individual. And I actually believe, and I've experienced myself, the opening force of the door is a barrier that continues to exist to this day. A lot of individuals and contractors are wonderful in making sure that the doors are wide enough, that there's no change of levels, those types of things. But that opening force of the door, more than the 5 pounds of pressure if it's interior, or the 8.5 if it's exterior, can be a huge difficulty. Also, for people who have visual disabilities, I have often heard from individuals that they wish that as individuals are planning for fixed furniture and the layout of the space, that the teams would consider, like straight paths of travels for individuals, so they're not having to maneuver weave in and out of a location, just maybe have a straight shoreline that they might be able to track. That helps individuals more who have the visual disabilities, as opposed to forcing them to weave in and out within the building or within the space.
Right.
Yeah. Some of the vast spaces, I'm not sure if you would experience this in the construction projects that you do, but when I worked at USF, we had this massive building that was constructed, and it was a massive space with no shorelines for individuals to understand what direction to go to. The walls would stop, and then kind of having a landmark from that point on that they should be, going to the right or to the left and such. The wide open spaces tend to cause some difficulty without some shorelines. And when I mean a shoreline, that can be a change in the type of texture of the ground surface. So as an example, going from carpet to tile can be a wonderful shoreline that a person would be able to track to understand which pathway that they can memorize to be able to
Absolutely.
use and navigate.
Absolutely. So you had mentioned the door pressures, and that's a huge thing for us. And I'm sure everybody watching this, especially our superintendents and area supervisors, even our project managers, are thinking about door pressure gauges, which is a tool we utilize to ensure that those door pressures are correct. And if they're not, we can adjust accordingly, right?
Yes.
When we talk about ADA, we're so caught up in so many aspects of these projects, especially our superintendents. They're out there in the field doing this, right? How important, or what would you say to emphasize the fact that I would say sometimes maybe we're guilty of forgetting the why behind why this is doing it. For example, the regulations are so strict on ADA that it can seem like a real chore to get it right and maybe a little more work. But what would you say to our group to stress the why behind why ADA is important and the people we're helping out doing it right?
Oh, absolutely. So I like to equate the ADA in that it's a civil rights law. Just plain and simple, it's a civil rights law. So, and I'd like to share a little story.
Yeah, please.
So, a couple years ago, I was in a construction project meeting, and I had some concerns about a parking lot that was going to be a gravel surface. My concerns were that individuals who have any type of mobility limitations are going to have a horrible time maneuvering that. So the contractor, in response to my concern, said to me, "You know what, Raquel, we're only talking about 1 in 40 people a month that might be impacted by this gravel lot." So when I heard that, I always like to reframe it in that it's a civil rights law, right? So if that contractor was to have a monthly meeting, and he had 200 people in that monthly meeting, it would not be appropriate for him to deny me, as a person who's Asian, access to that monthly meeting because of civil rights laws that were passed in the 1960s, right? You'd have 200 people there.
Right.
He couldn't deny me because I'm Asian to go to that meeting. So we shouldn't be denying somebody based on their disability status from having access to something. And when I frame it that way, sometimes people are like, "Oh, I get it. This isn't, just to be a do-gooder, right? It really is. The Americans with Disabilities Act is a civil rights law. And just like the civil rights in the 1960s protected individuals based on the race, color, national origin, religion, providing them with equitable opportunities to participate in services and programs, the ADA's focus is just simply on disability, but it is a civil rights law.
Yeah.
So that's the why behind it. And unfortunately, when there are barriers for individuals with disabilities, those barriers, really prohibit them from being able to benefit or use the goods and services that are available to everybody else. Wow. We also have to remember, too, that persons with disabilities have money, right? So when we're talking about restaurants, we're talking about patrons for those businesses that are going to be paying
Absolutely
good money for this, the products that business is providing. So there's many reasons why the access is important, but I think really the bottom line is that it's a civil rights law.
Yeah, and when you just so astutely explained that, my mind kept racing to it's not our first thought, but really what it translates into is a form of discrimination.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Wow. And yes, our customers do not build these establishments to have nobody in them.
Right, exactly. And I'm sure that they want each and every customer, patronizing them. So.
Absolutely. What kind of problems, if any, or challenges, maybe common ones, do you see in our particular industry when it comes to restaurant builds? As far as, are there common ADA issues that you have either heard of, have to dealt with, that are usually caught on the back end by, unfortunately, a person that experiences it?
Yeah, so I'd have to say that because the ADA has been enacted for so long, that the major components, construction teams tend to get it right. it's some of those fine tuning items that people are like, oh, gosh, we didn't really consider that. So I have a list.
Yeah, please.
And what I've tried to do is kind of go through my mind in regards to some concerns that people can, constantly, will share with
Yeah.
me. So, as an example, retrofitting restrooms. I know many times I know that there's a requirement for potty parity, so you have to maintain a certain number of stalls. And the challenge is what do you do now that you need to have the wider widths and the wider space? So, the creativity of installing a unisex restroom, a family restroom is very helpful. That also helps for individuals who have care attendants or somebody who they might need to assist them actually in the restroom.
Okay.
So that's one major concern. Clearance at the doorways for the retrofitting of the older locations. You might be really close to that 32-inch, space, but the door, when it's open, doesn't necessarily provide the actual required clearance. So changing the hinges on that so that door might be able to open up wide enough, but sometimes people don't think that they can do it, so then they just kind of move on to something else,
Yes.
but without being creative. I talked about the opening force of the doors. That to this day, when I'm going to facilities, when I'm pulling on the doors, like, oh my goodness, this is really, and these are newer facilities. So you don't necessarily have to be older ones.
Right.
I think sometimes it's the doors that are fire rated on the interior side that sometimes have to that are really heavy. Doors in restrooms tend to be really heavy. My gauge is that 5 pounds of opening force. If you really have to pull on it and struggle with it, that's definitely
Yeah.
not going to be accessible. The maneuvering clearance at doors as well.
Okay.
Many times isn't necessarily considered. I know about a year ago, there's a community member who was approaching a fast food restaurant. And she's like, gosh, Raquel, in order for me to get to this door, I almost fall off of the sidewalk,
Oh my gosh.
that's right in front of the door. So there's inadequate maneuvering clearance for her to be able to, she has a power wheelchair. It's one of the larger ones, but it's really because there's an accessible route that's
Okay.
there in front of that door. The location of the baby changing stations is really a barrier for many people. I've received some concerns from community members. One is, why do they continuously place the baby changing stations actually in the accessible restroom? Isn't there another location where they can be placed? Because what happens is when a parent, rightfully so, needs to change their baby, then that means the person who cannot use any of the other any of the other standard stalls will not be able to use that restroom.
Right.
Even though it's necessarily available. And interestingly, I just received an email from a former colleague of mine. She was asking who she can contact in Pasco County because the waste bins, which is like a permanent structure, not something that you can relocate, is actually obstructing her access in the bathroom within the stall. So I think for the majority of the time, it's some of the major pieces are well constructed and built. It's some of the little nuances of items that can really impede. Sometimes people will also install the toilet paper dispensers right above the handrail, preventing a person from being able to grasp onto that handrail as well. So, that again, it's just the placement of the items that
Sure.
can really obstruct.
Absolutely.
Also, the fixed seating. So that this is more of the tables that have the chairs that are attached. Sometimes the entities don't consider, providing wheelchair accessible spaces in that fixed seating, so that a person with a disability who uses mobility equipment would be able to sit with their families and such. And that's when the chairs and the tables are actually attached.
Yes, definitely. And then we were talking about the inside of the building. There's a number of things even to account for on the outside, right? With ramps, parking spots, all those things, which we focus heavily on at Stansell. But it is an exact science, but it's not if we're not paying attention.
Right.
It's those little things that can add up to a big problem, right?
Exactly, exactly. And the slope for the parking spaces
Yeah.
sometimes isn't necessarily factored in. I've seen some beautiful striping, a wonderful access ramp leading
Ramps,
to
yeah.
the facility, but the parking spaces are actually placed in an area where the slope is more than the 2%. And that's a dangerous situation because a person's wheelchair or their mobility equipment can actually roll away from them
Oh,
if it's not actually,
right.
a level area. So that's why some of these things, while it might seem, pretty meticulous,
Sure.
the critical nature
Absolutely.
is needed.
Absolutely. The before I forget, the door pressure gauges that we use. Best piece of advice I heard from a superintendent and the area supervisors was that if you've got the pressure right on the first try it about 3 or 4 or 5 more times, because there could be a difference between your first attempt and that last attempt if you're not getting consistency. So to our superintendents and area supervisors, I think that's important to definitely note. As far as you had done a great job of transitioning this question. Engineers, we follow their blueprints, right? And architects, and they have certain tolerances and tolerances that we have some wiggle room. In ADA, it's very specific. Now you can come under a certain requirement if there's a maximum or there's a minimum, but can you elaborate on for the people that are wondering, why is ADA just so specific about what they're asking for? It seems to me that they're going off of probably some specific studies and research that led them to these specs.
Yes, yes. So I don't know exactly how the measurements were, arrived at, but I can certainly assume that it definitely was through years of, kind of understanding how individuals maneuver and what is safe for them and such. So the reason why the measurements are so specific is that the ADA allows for, or is kind of designed so that a good number of individuals who have disabilities will be able to have access. It doesn't necessarily mean that it meets all persons with disability needs. It meets a large number
Okay.
of folks, but there's always going to be individuals who could benefit from things different, and such. But it's so precise because, as an example, with the toilet heights, anything that's higher, and I think it's 15 to 18 that's allowed, and forgive me if I'm wrong about that, but that allowance means that a person who may have limited mobility from being able to transfer, so the strength to transfer from their wheelchair onto the toilet, and then also be able to transfer off of the toilet back into their mobility equipment. And the reason why it's so high is for a number of reasons. So you might have somebody whose upper mobility may not be able to allow them to raise up, too high,
Yes.
and such. Or you may also have somebody, for example, my mom, as she had aged, she needed a higher toilet seat so that she could actually sit down and be able to raise from.
Absolutely.
So that the heights are really, absolute, just critical for the needs of what a person will be doing and engaging with whatever that measurement entails. Another critical thing, I actually had somebody question me a while ago about why, a change in level of 1/4 of an inch. The person actually said, well, Raquel, if the person's actually looking, then, they should be fine. But how many of us, as we're traveling along a pathway, is really going to be able to discern that something's higher than a
Absolutely.
1/4 of an inch? And that 1/4 of an inch, if it's higher than a 1/4 of an inch, if it's not beveled, that can actually cause a person who's using a walker or using a wheelchair to actually be, for the walker, they can lose control over it. For a person who's seated in a wheelchair, they can actually be thrown out of their wheelchair if it's higher than that 1/4 of an inch and it's, not beveled, which you allow it if it's a 1/2 an inch. It has to be beveled.
Sure.
But most of our, sidewalk issues or that change in level at the bottom of a ramp, sometimes people don't really consider that, and it could be a tremendous safety problem.
I'm so glad you elaborated on that because oftentimes, like we're on these jobs, it's close for the ADA, but it's like a quarter inch off, and we're like, well, isn't it close enough?
Yes.
Because in other aspects of the job, it may work, but for ADA, it's like it's got to be exact. And you just did a brilliant job of explaining why, the why behind it, which I think is so important. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. And just as a tidbit,
Please.
if people on your team are interested, the Access Board has some technical assistance guides, and I know at one time they used to provide some great videos
Oh, okay.
that kind of demonstrates some of the concepts that I'm speaking
Yes,
about,
yes.
you know, and how a person's maneuvering through it works or doesn't work, you know, and such. So that might
Absolutely.
be a
We're
great
always
resource.
looking for more resources, so thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You get to work with, first of all, I can tell it's a passion of yours doing this to help people. But also, you get to interact with people that have these disabilities and are affected by this every day.
Mm-hmm.
From their feedback or what you've witnessed personally, what is it? What is the experience like for an individual who tries to frequent one of these establishments that we're so blessed to build, and they can't access the building, or they can't get comfortable at a table or use the bathroom comfortably? What kind of feedback do you hear from them? I can only imagine how demoralizing that would be, or embarrassing, or I don't want to assume, but what do you hear from them?
Well, you know, I would say probably the general experience that people share is frustration, right? You know, that we're expecting to be able to enjoy time with their family, friends, partners, spouses.
Yes.
But then they go and they discover that, you know, it's an uncomfortable situation, and it just makes it, you know, very frustrating for them. And again, you know, the mindset of, you know, I'm a paying customer, you know, why am I not afforded the opportunities that everybody else in this location is given the opportunity for? And, you know, if you think about, you know, usually you have to plan and prepare, right, to be able to, you know, do your activities and
Yeah.
things like that. So, you know, that's a lot of time leading up to an experience that's not going to be pleasant. So
Absolutely.
the frustration it can be real. And again, I'd have to say, because the ADA has been passed for quite some time, the newer construction places are spot on
Good.
in regards to the access. I think people still have some challenges with some of the smaller, you know, mom and pop, you know, business owners and things like that.
Where they need to evolve.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any, and it's okay if you don't have any because you shared a story with us earlier, but are there any specific stories you recall of someone that, as a specific example where someone tried to, like you said, all the prep work to get there just to kind of be turned away?
So yeah, I mean, there's a few. A colleague of mine recently had shared that he'd gone to a restaurant, and the restaurant was having construction done on the AC unit,
Okay.
HVAC, and the pathway to the bathroom was completely obstructed. You know, with the piping, they
Yeah.
had the temporary funnel systems coming down, and there's a big square box that was in the middle, so he couldn't use the restroom. You know, at the restaurant. I've seen individuals raise some concerns that when, again, a construction project is happening, that the team decided to use all of the accessible parking spaces as the staging area for the materials, but failed to relocate. It's not a problem if they have to have, you know, place items on, but if you're going to take away the accessible parking spaces, you really need to make sure that those are relocated to a route, a location where a person can have an accessible route
Sure.
to. Oh, this was a mom and pop place. The threshold at the doorway. It was a restaurant that was recently changed names, ownership. But the threshold, the step, probably 3 inches at the front door, was not available, and the person was really frustrated because this is new owners that they should have, you know, provided the access.
Sure.
You know, within the restaurant. So.
Raquel, what are the consequences for restaurants, whether they exist or they just launched new, if they do in fact have ADA violations? What does that look like?
So, it can be civil penalties. It can be fees to the individuals who raised the concerns and the complaints. In addition to the requirements for bringing their facility up into compliance. So not only bringing their locations into accessibility standards, but also compensation to the entities that were affected by the lack
Absolutely.
of access.
And as we understand, if you're going to update those facilities, that usually means undoing work to redo the work, which is always, or I shouldn't say always, but pretty expensive usually.
Yes, yes, and hence, I have actually kind of going back to the thing and getting it right from the start. When I first started doing this work, people have stressed to me, Raquel, it's really important that we catch these things in the design plans early on in the design, because it's much more easy to address the access issues in the design phases, early in the design phases, rather than even later. So after something is constructed, it's even much incredibly more difficult at that point to remedy the situations, and costly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As far as ADA lawsuits, you had mentioned that being one of the consequences. There's a lot of information out there that suggests ADA lawsuits are on the rise, even though I would agree with you, we're seeing a lot of entities that are actually trying to be more in compliance. Especially in Florida, which is where we're licensed in almost half the country, but that's a lot of our work's in Florida. Are you seeing a rise in ADA lawsuits as well? And if so, what would you attribute that to?
So, there was a period of time where I heard a lot about some drive-by lawsuits. I've not been hearing, and people have not been sharing as much of that in more recent year or two, but definitely there was a rise. The ADA was passed in the early 1990s, so was it 35 years?
Yes.
So, so I'm attributing it to a couple of things. First and foremost, it's been 35 years.
Yes.
Some individuals probably are really exhausted and tired about trying to do the more proactive nature of their advocacy and talking to a store manager, expressing their concerns because nothing seems to be done.
Sure.
Our local advocates here in the Tampa Bay area that network with the city of Tampa tend to be hesitant to file any lawsuits. They want to address it more from an advocacy standpoint, but I know that there's some other advocates within Florida that have said, I'm just done. I'm tired of trying just to talk to the manager, writing the letters. If they're not moving on this, it's been 35 years.
They're seeking out a bigger hammer, no pun intended, right?
And then, of course, there are other individuals who, you hear that they're not even using the services, right? They're just going in, taking quick pictures, and then leaving because they have monetary gains that they want. And I know our local advocates in the area really disagree with that platform because their greatest concern is with those types of lawsuits, then the entity doesn't have the opportunity to fix the excess issues, and then it's going to continue to be not accessible.
Yeah.
When the entities are actually not required to make the remedies in those situations, then it doesn't really benefit anybody except for the person who's getting the monetary gain.
And you had mentioned drive-by lawsuits, right, earlier. For everyone watching, I don't want to assume they understand. I read a little bit about this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what this is, we're under the microscope, scope rather, on so many levels where our superintendents are looking at what our trade partners are doing. Our area supervisors are monitoring what they're doing. The engineers are looking at what we're doing. Inspectors are coming in and looking at what we're doing. Just tons of entities with eyeballs on it. But with the drive-by lawsuits, these are individuals who are proactively going to establishments, more or less hoping to find imperfections on the ADA so they can file suit. And from what I read, it's not unusual to have one person who actually has dozens of lawsuits against different entities.
Yes.
So that's what you're referring to on the drive-by lawsuits,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes. So it's not, from, again, the advocate standpoint in our local area, that, the greatest concern is that when that's happening, the individual really isn't taking the opportunity to ensure that the business is trying to remedy so that the access issues are resolved, but they're actually in it for monetary gain.
Yes, absolutely.
And what I have understood that they're doing is sometimes they're just pulling up into the parking spaces, and if there's no access to the facility, that's something that they're filing. If they can actually get in the door, then they're going into the restroom to see what the access issues may be there, taking pictures, and then filing the suits from there.
Yeah, we might, on the surface, we might turn around and say, well, that sounds like our customer's problem. But really, at the end of the day, it's our problem because we built this facility for them. And it was our job to catch us and do it right up front, right? So naturally, if they get sued, Stansell Construction is getting brought into it. If it was, obviously us. So it's an interesting concept.
Yes, it is. It is. But again, I have confidence that as long as the teams are following all of the building
Get it right up
codes,
front,
looking at
right.
the Florida Accessibility Code, which actually mirrors ADA standards, with a couple of exceptions where we provide some greater access. But as long as you're following that, then you should be fine.
Yes,
So.
absolutely. I have some data here that's interesting. ADA lawsuit settlements range between $5,000 and $50,000. And a recent ADA lawsuit and fine included Cat's Deli in New York, which agreed to pay $20,000 penalty for an ADA violation. Bad Daddy's Burger Bar in Tennessee agreed to pay $352,000 settlement after being sued for alleged ADA violations. I don't know about you, Raquel, but I don't have that in my wallet. So it's not cheap to have these. And that doesn't count what you just mentioned earlier, which is even if you're paying that out, you also have the responsibility to bring this up to not code, but to be compliant with the law.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
So it's not only the penalties, financial penalties, but also making sure that the facility is now going to be accessible. And they usually have a tight turnaround too.
Yes.
I've seen some where it's within a year that
Wow.
they have the requirements to remedy the changes and such. So,
Wow.
and kind of speaking about that, I found something with Wendy's. This was a long time ago.
Okay.
The franchise had to pay $2,000 for each person that had been affected, that had filed a complaint against Wendy's. $5,000 to each of the federal and state task force members for a total of $50,000. So when you look, if you go to the ADA.gov website and you type in Wendy's, you would be able to pull up the details. But it was access issues, going in within the facility. It was the queuing lines.
Absolutely.
I think at one time they used to have like a wall that was there that was creating access issues for the queuing to get up to the counter.
Wow.
I remember those. It's interesting to see that there was actually a lawsuit.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I shouldn't say, I don't know if it was a lawsuit, but a settlement agreement.
Settlement, right. You had mentioned ADA.gov. What resources would you encourage our superintendents, our area supervisors, anybody at Stansell Construction to maybe proactively bookmark or save on their phone that we could look at so that we can actually have a more or less a phone a friend or a verification system because sometimes these codes change too with time, just to make sure, like you said, on the front end we're getting it right. What other resources would you recommend?
Right. So the Access Board is the entity that actually created the ADA design standards, and the Access Board's website has a wonderful long list of technical assistance guides. They used to have some videos. I didn't quickly find them as I was searching recently, but the technical assistance guides I really appreciate because it spells certain topics out. For example, if you want to understand the location of Braille signage and such and the reasoning for it, they'll explain it, in great detail.
Yeah.
So the Access Board is a great place. If you want to actually understand lawsuits that have been filed, the ADA.gov site also has those resources as well. In both locations, if you're really wanting more of the technical expertise, the Access Board actually has a technical assistance line that it's available for people to call.
Okay.
And it's fantastic because they can actually get you directly to the specific location.
All right. And how would I get to the Access Board if I was
So if you do a Google search and type in Access Board,
okay, for ADA.
just type in Access Board, and then it'll bring it up. And then under the Access Board, on the Access Board's website, it has the options to select what you're wanting information on. So
Okay.
the Access Board actually has several areas that they have some, I guess, oversight
Yes.
for. You can kind of select the topic
Okay.
on their website. And I can send you all these links.
That would be
as well.
fantastic,
Yeah.
and we'll share it with the group. And we have some internal documents that we've, Alan Bradford, our area supervisor, made an ADA document for the purposes of verification that's in our Procore. And Anthony Connor more recently generated one that's very comprehensive, that is a massive checklist, very specific specs on there of for every scenario ADA. So we are making a very conscious effort to, like you said, get this right and get it right up front.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, and here in Florida, I just kind of want to remind, and so the Florida accessibility codes pretty much mirror the ADA design standards, but in Florida, we actually provide some better access in certain areas. So we also always want to make sure that we're also double checking the Florida accessibility code.
Great.
As well.
Great
So,
suggestion. As far as jurisdiction with ADA, I think off the top of my head nationally, but do certain states actually, to build on your point there, are they state specific or is it national?
Yes. So I understand that states have the opportunity to create their own building code as far as accessibility goes. And what I have always understood is that the state code can always provide increased access per their state code, but should never be less than
Gotcha.
the ADA design standards.
Gotcha.
So as an example, the ADA design standards only requires, I think, 9-foot accessible parking spaces. Here in Florida, we actually require 12. So, that's, so it's fine for us because, it's okay for the state to do that because it's providing that greater level of access.
Okay. For any of our employees, we're a company of well over 100 full-time people here. We're in almost half the country. If any of our people happen to have one of the disabilities that falls under here, where would you suggest they go to find out what their rights are, whether it's frequent in a restaurant or just anything they go to do? Where can they find out about their rights?
Oh, absolutely. So ada.gov is a great location. They actually have, know your rights, and they also provide other categories and direct individuals to other protections. For example, if somebody has a concern with their apartment complex or their rights under housing, it would actually direct them to the fair housing website. So ada.gov has a plethora of resources.
Fantastic. We've talked a lot about ADA. You've been very generous with your time, your insight, but is there anything else that we need to know from the standpoint of Stansell and the industry, wherein anything that we didn't cover that you want to mention?
Well, one of the things I just always ask for individuals to do is just kind of consider, and your teams, I just want to recognize, many times the individuals that are involved with construction are looking at a multitude of requirements.
Yes.
In the past, I think ADA requirements was sort of like kind of pushed to the side because you're focusing on some major life safety types of things. For example, fire and, prevention and electrical concerns and things like that. But what I always ask for individuals to do is kind of take a step back, as they're doing their work and just, kind of think, okay, if somebody has a limitation, how will this be impacted? And just taking that moment to consider, have you actually used the fantastic checklist that your colleagues have created? Have you referred to that just to make sure that, everything is actually in place?
Wow.
And then again, really scrutinizing the design plans in advance, and then just making sure that the contractors then are actually following what the designs were intended to be. So.
We call it inspect or trust but verify. We call it here, and it's such an interesting point because we don't expect perfection from our subcontractors or our trade partners for that matter. But boy, catching that imperfection where we catch it matters. And you said it a number of times, and we can't say it enough. Catching it up front is just so pivotal versus the problems it can create for not only Stansell but for everybody else in the process, our customer, the general public. It's just so. It's just so important.
Yes.
Can't thank you enough, Raquel, for being here. You were super insightful.
Thank
we
you.
told you were going to get a different perspective on the ADA, and Raquel definitely delivered on that. And can't thank our people out there enough for taking the time to make this important, along with everything else they're doing out there. We had a great conversation here, and we'll continue to have that conversation because ADA is so important. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.
Thank you.